LBO Infrastructure Summit 2016.
Great. Thanks, Gordon. So with that, let's begin the discussion. We have 30 minutes and 8 panelists. So it'll be interesting sharing our time. So let's start with that. Maybe we start with Liang. You've come to Sri Lanka with the port city or renamed port city. What makes Sri Lanka an attractive destination?
Well, I think, I've been here for slightly more than a year and a half, and I have been very fortunate in the sense, or maybe unfortunate in some sense. If you look at the fact that the government suspended the project that I work in very soon after I arrived. But the plus side of that is that I get to do some things which probably I will not get to do if the project was not suspended. In May last year, together with a TV station here, the project took part in what was called a Rambumi rally, if you remember that. And that kind of brought me around the whole island. I was up north in Jaffna, down south in Matara, Trincomalee, if I can remember all the names though. Nuralia, Kandy, you name it, all right? So I've traveled around the whole island. And what I can tell you is that, Jim mentioned just now that Sri Lanka does not have the resources that Mauritius have. But I think Sri Lanka has a lot of different other resources if you look at it from perhaps the cultural heritage point of view. You have mountains, you have beaches, right? And compared to the place I come from Singapore, I mean, we have nothing, totally nothing, all right? We just have these people running around and trying to be productive. And if we're not successful in it, we are dead meat, right? But in Sri Lanka, you have the mountains, you have the beaches, you have your tea plantations. I mean, there's just so many things to go for. So this is a place of huge opportunity, and you happen to be a part. I mean, I speak with my colleagues about what I call the 4 major countries in South Asia. If you put that together, there's 1.7 billion population. That's huge. All right, you put the whole of Southeast Asia together, we are not even half of that, or maybe about half of that, yeah. And you have about 300,000 high net worth individuals that we have estimated and expected to double in about 10 years' time. And I think that's a huge market. It's all a matter of how Sri Lanka can attract a part, just a fraction of this, to want to come here and maybe spend some time here and hopefully spend some money, I think, yeah. And therefore, whether directly or indirectly contribute to the economy of the country. And I think there's great potential. It's a matter of how the government can now get its act together, put in the right policy, whether it is in terms of FDIs, attracting FDIs, providing the right financial services for these people to want to come here and do their wealth management, do their financial transactions, whatever it might be. And while they're here...
So creating the right environment and
yes.
To make use of a hospitality kind of
right.
Destination.
And all the other resources that the country have, to bring in and to attract this market that, would want to come here if the environment is correct. And I think Sri Lanka can get the act together.
Sure, that's a good point. And with that, maybe Rohan, you can, I think Anarkali mentioned it, Jim mentioned it about ease of doing business. We are 107 ranked right now. I don't know if the World Bank statistics are correct or not, but we are. But despite that, you've managed to bring in a company here and start up operations in 3 months. What was your secret?
I don't think it's just my secret, but I think there's a whole team involved. But just to get it in context, about 6 months ago, towards the end of January, the London Stock Exchange Group, in their wisdom, decided to move their center of excellence for all tech and development support worldwide to Sri Lanka. So some may have thought this is very brave. Some would have said it's very foolish. But there were a group of Sri Lankans who took it on as a challenge and went about figuring out how to get this thing done. And the good news is that after 6 months, the company has hired over 150 high-end professionals. They've got through all the approvals, the legal barriers, and also started construction and well into completing a 30,000 square foot commercial space in the heart of Colombo. And this would not have been possible or even thought of if the company read all the news and the statistics about the ease of doing business and operating in Sri Lanka. What has been a huge success, in my view and the organization's view, is the incredible support extended by the main government organizations, and they're not paying me any commission, believe me. These include the Board of Investment, the Urban Development Authority, and the Megapolis Ministry in making this happen. It is done at record speed because they believed in what we were trying to achieve. There was a lot of research done prior to engaging these organizations and planning. But what it shows is that if Sri Lankans decide they want to get something done, they can find some very innovative and creative ways to get it done. And I think as a country and as a nation, we got to understand and believe in ourselves that we can make almost the impossible happen, right? And I think there are a lot of reasons why we can find why we can't do things and why we shouldn't do things. But I don't think we have time on our hands. We have to just get on and do it now, okay? And I think the planning and the thinking is all great stuff, but I think there are organizations, and believe me, the London Stock Exchange Group is one of the most regulated organizations in the world. And believe me, every level of approval, every line we had to get it approved. And what is incredible was the Sri Lankan government organizations worked at a faster pace than we could actually get our approvals in place. So I don't think that is an excuse.
So the institutions are able to keep up with you guys if you pitch it to the right people at the right time.
Absolutely. The timing is important. You got to sell the vision, and they must believe that you're doing the right thing for the country. Okay? And if that is not established, God help you.
God help us all. Anakali, the similar type of question, because you were involved with TPG coming into the banking sector. That was a landmark deal in the private equity community. TPG, one of the largest private equity funds, I think the third or the second largest private equity fund, bought into a bank 70% share, and the legislation at that time did not allow for that majority ownership by a single entity. What's your experience with that?
So, in the context of that particular transaction, I have to say our interaction with the regulators was very positive, both with the central bank and the SEC. The feedback from an investor like TPG was that it was relatively easy to communicate and also the response times were very good. I mean, gestation periods for transactions here tend to be anywhere from 6 months to 18 months. It errs more to the 12 to 18 month side, and it took us quite some time, especially because in this case it was a highly regulated industry, and we had the restriction. But it's, you know, it was a landmark transaction, and they're an investor that still looks for opportunities and will continue to look for opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, they invested in the healthcare sector as
That's
well.
right.
But is that similar to Rohan's experience? It was the right time, right place, right people?
I think it was the right opportunity. You know, we did not go in for an investment trying to do the same. If you had tried to do that investment or wanted that level of ownership, let's say even in the likes of an NDB or a Sampat Bank, I think we would have struggled. We would not have met the regulators' criteria. So it was the choice of the investment as well was critical.
Right. I think that's, like to bring in Thilan to this, because when you talk about the right opportunity, you talked about private PPPs. Do we have a pipeline of PPPs? Now we're talking about, let's bring in the private sector. If 10 investors come in today, do they have projects to invest in?
I'm not sure to answer honestly, but I believe there's a pipeline of pipeline projects.
That's a new one, so you can elaborate on that then?
Because to me, what I mean by the pipeline is having an official solicitation through an RFP. And at the moment, I'm not in government, but I do not believe that, I mean, there are some at advanced stages of negotiation. I believe that the Hambantota port conversion into a more commercial operation is at an advanced stage of discussion. So that was my whole point, that it is important that the Policy Development Office of the Ministry creates the policy environment. Oh, yes, there is, of course, the East Terminal open today. There's one. Right. So I'm sort of struggling to come up with, but I'm sure Nayana has a few. So yes, probably there can be a lot more.
Okay.
The East Terminal took a little while longer than anticipated for the RFP to come out, and for some strange reason it was the ADB that prepared the RFP. I don't get it, but that's my personal opinion.
Right. Thanks. In terms of, so we talked about nation building projects, and Anupam, I'd like to get you on this. There's a correlation between nation building and nation branding, which you talked about. What's the correlation between the two, and is there a correlation between nation branding and FDI?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
Is there a correlation between nation branding, with your experience with Singapore, India, and London, and increased FDI flow?
Sure, absolutely. I think the way I describe it is a spark and glue sort of a strategy. If nation building is about finding the sparks, whether it's a megapolis or any number of projects that drive economic development, you do need a glue that brings the whole story together, and that's the nation branding. So nation building and nation branding ought to go hand in hand to result in a virtuous cycle of positive economic investment. You mentioned 3 examples, London, Singapore, and India. India, I spoke a little bit about, and I think the data shows that there's a very clear correlation. In fact, it's interesting that some of the issues that are being brought up now as interest has picked up again in India for a variety of reasons, some of the issues remain. Some of the issues have improved. The fact is money flew into the country, money was made, companies invested, jobs were created, tax revenue was earned. There have been issue of retrospective tax in India, etc. But I think the story holds, and there has been continued investor interest. Obviously, the peaks and troughs have been there, and I think in a large measure, it's been because nation building and nation branding weren't going hand in hand. In London's case, it's really interesting. Until the arrival of the mayoral office, and not many people know that the mayoral office is only 15, 16 years old. Ken Livingstone, who was the first mayor of London back in 2000, it was really his idea to bring the Olympics into London. It was hugely controversial, but I think there was an extremely interesting story to build not just, obviously, London, but the UK, and taking a deprived part of London, East London, and creating a whole legacy around that, partnering with a shopping center company like Westfield and creating a really interesting, compelling project, which then became the legacy. And it's been one of the most successful stories, and politics aside, because there were two mayors, Ken Livingstone and then Boris Johnson, who got behind this, because there was really a team. The CEO of London 2012 was actually an investment banker, Paul Dighton. He was the one who was going out there raising the money. So I think it has to be a team effort. Singapore is a fascinating example of how it has continued to, perhaps in fact, not even tell its story, because it's such a firm believer, I think, and tends to be on the back foot often, and let stereotypes define Singapore. I keep talking to some of my friends in Singapore who work on marketing Singapore, that it's time to be a bit more confident. But I think there's a great learning there of being conservative, and getting the product right. So I think nation building and nation branding are absolutely go hand in hand. They can be driven independently, though. It's not that they have to be driven by the same set of people or the same set of agencies or the same set of stakeholders. There needs to be coordination and communication.
Perfect, thanks. Kamal, Kamal, and then I'll get to Jim as well. I think a similar type of question is, if I ask you to take your development financier hat off and just think of as a financier, what's Sri Lanka lacking? Because we're not getting the funding that we're looking for. What's the bottleneck?
I think the funding is actually not the issue. Funding, and the reason I say that, despite my presentation and the credit rating, and therefore potentially certain types of funding not directly available, but still can be mobilized with certain enhancements. So, and there are various different funding sources that can be tapped into for particular risk profiles. But I think it goes to the point that Thilan was making. The right projects are not there, and there are a number of reasons that the right projects are not there. Mm-hmm. And it's about packaging the projects, making sure the right contractual structures are there to be able to mobilize the financing, and then creating a larger environment that gives confidence to investors to come in, because there is a broad strategic plan. Because larger investors will come not for one small investment, because they see this is just an entry for much more to do. And I think that's where I think a megapolis plan is a wonderful first step, and that we've taken, of setting the large ground plan, but we need to now move into the next implementation plan of creating those RFPs, having that project pipeline, and having the right contracts and a competitive process through which projects are awarded, so that investors get the confidence that it's not a few who have the right access to the right people will get the projects, but you will be able to attract the right investors who are competitive, who have the capacity, who have the technical experience, and they know then, because they have the right skill levels, they can compete and get the right projects. So once you have the right players and the right contractual structures, financing can be delivered.
Can be done. Okay, good. Jim, macro fundamentals. You talked about that, just listening to your presentation and the numbers that you're quoting, that are fundamentally, we have a macro fundamentals issue. Are we focusing on the wrong thing by building more infrastructure and focusing on infrastructure before we get the fundamentals right?
No, I don't think you're doing the wrong thing. I mean, they can be concurrent, but they have to be in partnership. And so this is such a broad topic. It's difficult to pinpoint one particular issue or the other. The country needs infrastructure in so many different ways. The word infrastructure itself means many different things, right? Not just roads and bridges. But at the same time, it needs to improve itself so that it is more attractive to both the existing local economy and that very large and desirous global economy it wants to engage.
Right.
So it's got to find a way to keep going, but at the same time keep improving.
Keep improving the macro fundamentals.
So that more and more people want to join this tremendous nation in its quest to go to the where it wants to go.
There's actually an audience question as well to follow up on that. And I'm going to quote the audience. Jim spoke of high level of country risk in SL within this Within this context, what are the available funding sources to fund USD 40 billion in 10 years?
Yeah, I saw that. Who asked that question? No, it's an interesting question, but it's comprised of hundreds of different points. $40 billion is just a number. It can be $40 billion spread out in so many different things of raw infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, service industries from schools and all sorts of other things around that. So broken down, maybe I can answer the question in the following way. Would somebody lend $40 billion to Sri Lanka tomorrow for 10 years? Probably not, okay? But plenty of people would be there to fund a series of different types of activities with good sponsors, good promoters, for tenors that are lengthy. But as you get out to the 10, 12, 15-year period, that requires a better country risk view than a 3-year loan or something along those lines. And as you fund with international money, you have to be worried about devaluation risk. And so derivative products are available, but they too are limited on the tenor side as to what people's appetites are. So it's all interwoven. And I guess what I was trying to say at the end of the day was there's plenty of projects, but you can't ignore where the projects are taking place and who the promoters of these projects are and what the effect of the sovereign could have on the private and vice versa. So it's all a partnership, if you will.
Right, good. Anupam, I'll get to you. I'll ask Tilan, in terms of implementation, going back to the megapolis concept, in your experience, having gone through this process 20 years ago, what are some thoughts on implementation? How do we go about doing that? Are there some easy wins that we should go after first?
Yes, I think while the enabling legislation is strengthened or new legislation is being introduced, and introducing legislation, as was pointed out, is a complex process. Even if they may not be an ideal fit within the overall scheme of things, the low-hanging fruit should now be really showing that it is breaking ground. It's been about a year since the new parliament was in place, and I do not think that if you look at the ratio of number of projects, a number of about 170 was put out there, and something in the order of 5 or 6 being implemented, which is around 5%, is not a healthy ratio. And therefore, I really believe that the agencies concerned should put out RFPs as quickly as possible, and not just put, in my view, a bunch of lands or whatever available. I mean, this has been done by the UDA recently, saying that these lands are available for investment under the Swiss challenge method. Those are not PPPs in any case. I mean, I'm talking of general investment projects. So there needs to be a more structured approach, probably single window, where one single window would coordinate the other agencies, that would give sophisticated investors the confidence that the process would move forward quickly. So at the moment, I do not think that it was talked about earlier, the interagency coordination is happening, is really not happening as satisfactorily for fast-tracking implementation of projects.
Okay, good. Gordon, I know I want to get you into the discussion as well. In terms of, you talked about project risks. From a project risk perspective, is there a difference between developing and developed countries, how you assess risks, and what should Sri Lanka be our projects as our megapolis projects are get underway, what should we be focusing on?
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question because the difference between developed countries and developing countries, in a sense, in infrastructure is infrastructure in itself. And in developed countries, you still have metro lines, you have tunnels, roads, bridges. Same for developing countries. So maybe I'll answer this question in 2 or 3 points, maybe. The first point I want to highlight is that if you look at developed countries or cities, such as Singapore or Shanghai or Hong Kong, and as Dorothy Chan mentioned this morning, that the Hong Kong infrastructure is still expanding. And the difficulty of having infrastructure projects in such a congested space in these cities is that there's a lot of uncertainties. There are a lot of things that can go wrong, and because there's not a proper passing of information from the 70s where the first infrastructure were built to nowadays 40, 50 years down the line where we need to revamp the whole system. There can be things that we don't know what's down there underground. We don't know how the initial infrastructure was built. There was no proper records of how the buildings or the foundations were built. So in developed countries, you still get these risks, these concerns. Now, in developing countries, the easiest thing that I can think about in terms of risk exposure is that there is lack of the talent for infrastructure, and as highlighted earlier in the conference, there's not much experience in light rail or these mega cities or megapolis projects where there are local experience in building these. So
lack of talent is a big risk factor when you guys
Yes.
evaluate projects in developing countries?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I think we have to put technology into play as well for risk management. There are so many tools out there that can help risk managers or project engineers do their jobs so much easier. The real-time data for monitoring projects, things like that, which can probably save projects in case of losses.
Good. Okay, thanks. Anupam, did you have something to add to the discussion?
Yeah, just a point that we were talking about earlier, which I failed to mention, was that, 2 points actually. One is about optimism, and I think its role in branding a nation, and I think it's almost critical that whoever leads the charge, nation building probably needs to be led by a pessimist or a realist, but nation branding needs to be led by an optimist and a truthful one. I was just going to refer people to a website called ibef.org if they're interested, which was really set up as a resource center. That was the first step in creating an information resource center for investors into India. And I was just checking, and it's interesting to see that the template remains, and it's perhaps the most visited website in India. But I think that's a great place to start, have a website. I did a similar search for brand Sri Lanka as an example. Right. Didn't really find anything, though after looking hard enough, I did land up on Invest in Sri Lanka and Opportunity Sri Lanka. But I think that's just some practical things that can be done, while the politicians and the businessmen are talking it out and thrashing it out. Somebody can go and build an interesting website and promote success stories in Sri Lanka.
Good. So it's an open question. I think Thilan brought this up, and anybody who wants to answer this could answer it. It's about creating one single unit for private for PPP. Is that a realistic goal, given that we have so many different ministries doing the same thing?
Kumudu, more than realistic, it is really the necessity for that is that you cannot replicate the highly specialized skills for PPPs. Putting a piece of land and inviting an apartment developer to develop, it's not a PPP. That's fine. That can be under multiple agencies. These are projects that require months, if not years, of negotiation. It requires high levels of financial structuring skills, legal skills that often involve international lawyers coming to the play, along with certainly local law firms, working with the Attorney General's Department, protracted back and forth in terms of what should be the revenue share to the government, what are the risk-sharing elements between the government and the private sector party. You just cannot replicate this across multiple ministries. And you need to bring in highly paid people to do this, to do the core work that is necessary, and have what I mentioned, the USAID line of funding. Thank you, Jim, for your country there. They are willing to offer some money to procure that technical assistance. When SAGT was done, we hired companies out in New York and Europe to form part of the government negotiating team. Because on the other end of the table, we had P&O, John Keel's, a crack team of executives. So we have to meet them head on pari passu. Otherwise, we end up with an unfavorable deal for the country. So that's the reason why I'm proposing that it has to be within 1 year. There's no other alternative.
Perfect. Hey, Kamal, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I took the microphone to kind of, well, say the same thing. But just to complement that, I think to beyond what Tilant said, also having that one-stop shop also helps look at it from a national perspective. When you have different windows focused on their microcosm, then you're looking at that space only. So when you have a one window, you can look at it on a nationally strategic basis and then match the dots from a national basis. But I was, Tilant said what I was going to say for the rest of it already.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, guys. I think we are 30 minutes is up. Great panel discussion, and thank you.
With Kumudu's permission, could I pose two questions to one to Rohan and one to Lian? Rohan, okay, you have set up this massive project, not so easy project, highly complex project in a matter of 6 months. If ease of doing business in Sri Lanka is so low, how did you achieve that? What is your experience?
We went through that, right?
Sorry, you went through that. I'm sorry that I was out for a couple of minutes. I missed that. Yeah.
Yes, if I may answer.
Sorry, if you have already answered, that's fine. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I don't think it is very complex. I don't think in terms of capital, it's quite intense. My personal experience is I don't see a major difficulty in doing business with the local agencies. Is a conclusion I reached maybe 15 or 20 minutes ago.
So, Lian, there was just now a question came. I'm not sure whether it was picked up earlier. So that was about, again, Jim kind of, Jim, the picture projected by Jim was not very encouraging. Okay. Either, very courageous people or, very foolish people will invest money in that kind of a macroeconomic and governance backdrop. So how are you going to bring this? But you are pretty confident. You are always very bullish about bringing this 15, 17 billion investment support city.
Right. Well, let's say that it's going to be a tough job. It's not easy. Yeah. Shankar from JLL mentioned just now that they were tracking some 300 over cities. Okay, and it doesn't seem like Colombo is standing within the top half of that cities that they've been tracking at this point in time. Jim has mentioned that Mauritius has a great financial center, and all this is lacking in Colombo at this point in time. So what do we have going for Colombo and particularly Port City right now? I think one of the key things is that if you look at it, I've mentioned about the population, I've mentioned about the market potential. And basically, I think it's a matter of how we can put some things together to attract this market. How can we divert those FDIs from India to Mauritius? to come to Colombo, or in particular, the port city?
Can I answer in 1 minute? There are 5 things to build business confidence that we do more of the $1 billion plus transactions that Port City entails. One is, Jim pointed this out, we need the trade agreements, because it's on the back of those trade agreements that we will promote FDI. It's on the back of FDI that we will have entrepreneurs move into this country, expatriates their families, and then creating a demand. That was the first source of demand in Singapore, for example, in the 1960s. State enterprise reform. That's a low-hanging fruit. It is not as difficult as it seems to be. We need to stop the bleeding of Sri Lankan and a whole host of other state enterprises. We need the PPPs coming through. Close 2 transactions a year. Of $1 billion, it makes a difference. We are still a small economy. Tourism, we need to market the hell out of the country. We need to work out a proper roadmap, and that is, again, a low-hanging fruit. And then finally, exports, 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 not just manufactured goods, but services as well. So these are the 5 things. If we do these 5 things, Liang will fill Port City, Megapolis, Nana will be jumping up for joy in another 2 or 3 years' time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If I may just
sorry.
summarize that, I think one of the things I wanted to highlight today is that somebody shared on my Facebook an article, and it says, Saudi billionaire closes on New York City, highest pad for $88 million. I shared this with my friends, and I posed a couple of questions. First, will he also buy a penthouse in Colombo Port City eventually? Second, what can he bring to Sri Lanka? And third, I think most importantly, after being here for 1.5 years and having seen the social and political environment around here, my third question is, will Sri Lankans welcome him? So I think if we can bring somebody like this and a bunch of them around, I'm sure the FDIs will follow.
I'm sure you will. Okay, thanks. Before I thank our panel, I just want to touch on a few things. What did we try to achieve? What we wanted to do is create that honest, open dialogue, honest, open, candid conversation on megapolis. We didn't want to have, megapolis guys come in and, make presentations. Okay, this is what we are going to do, because that is available on website. Okay, but what we wanted to do is critically analyze, critically debate about the possible challenges and about, possible pitfalls. And so we can add to the wealth of knowledge the megapolis folks already have. Okay, so it is not to discourage, but to have a realistic, pragmatic view about the execution of this project. Because I personally believe it's a wonderful opportunity for Sri Lanka. I personally believe Port City is a great idea, and it's a great opportunity for Sri Lanka, and we should not lose out these opportunities because we have, because of the certain shortcomings. So quickly, because it's a nationally important project for us. And I think Thilan mentioned this, and most of the others also mentioned it. Act now. Planning is enough. Okay, where is the buck? Okay, where is action? So when are we going to see the first, billion dollar, agreement going to be signed? I believe within a few weeks, and I know. Okay, so that will boost the morale of the people. That will also boost the, attractiveness of the country. More than anything, I think that will establish among the general public, hey, there is something really happening. I think that is also important. That's a great point. And we discussed about the being open-minded. We cannot go back and isolate ourselves from the rest of the world, and we need to plug ourselves in the international value chains, supply chains. That is the route we have to take, and we should take an advantage of our proximity to something like 1.5 billion people. That is excluding East Africa and excluding East Africa and the Far East. And finally, a big thank goes to all the speakers. despite their busy schedules, coming and spending time with us. And those who flew from various places, from New Jersey City to Chennai to Hong Kong and Singapore, and sacrificing 2 to 3 days of their working time and spending with us. So I simply don't have words to thank, enough words to thank those sacrifices and the generosity of all our speakers, all our panelists, and all our session chairs. And it is a wonderful experience. It's personally, I cherish these experiences because I get to work with people who are extremely knowledgeable, who are highly professional and much more intelligent than me. So too, I can learn something. It's a great intellectual experience working with wonderful people over here. So I think with that, I would like to end. And finally, I would like to thank once again Anupam. And I approached you at the last moment. And she was so kind to accommodate me. I mean, I think I spoke to her just last week. When I saw a gap in the agenda, so I immediately wanted somebody who has a practical experience. And thanks so much, Kamal, joining us, Jim. This is the second or third time you're on a second time on our stage. So I hope this will not be the last. Thilan, even though you warned me that don't invite you again, I'm sorry. You will be here in future as well. Gordon, welcome to Sri Lanka. Hope you enjoyed your 48 hours in Sri Lanka. Thank you so much, Rohan. And Leanne, as usual, wonderful to work with you. Kumudu, this is not the first time. This will not be the last time. Okay, thank you so much. It's wonderful to work with somebody like you who is so committed, who absorbs the content, and who worked with me very closely and developing sessions. So that's it, and I would like to invite all of you to join cocktails. And once again, please put your hands together and thank our panel. Thank you so much.
LBR LBO Infrastructure Summit 2016.